one, go.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening. We are so looking forward to the program. At Asia Society, Texas, we believe in the strength and beauty of diverse perspectives and stand in solidarity with all people threatened by racism and violence. We trust in the power of art, dialogue, and ideas to combat bias, and we remain dedicated to welcoming all. So we're so glad that each one of you could make time to be with us this evening for tonight's webcast featuring Bennie Flores Ansell and Guadalupe Hernandez, two of our featured artists from the current series of Artists on Site. We're delighted to also be joined by Prince Varughese Thomas, who is my co-moderator this evening, which will be a lively conversation. In terms of the overall structure of tonight, each of the artists in turn will make a presentation of their work, and then we'll jump into conversation amongst the four of us, but we want you to be a part of tonight's conversation as well. So please feel free to share your questions through the chat in whichever platform you're joining us, and we'll incorporate those into our conversation as we go on. And also, please make sure to make time next Tuesday on September 7th to join us again for our second webcast featuring the artists Pritika Rajgaria and Stevie Spurgeon. And my co-moderator that evening will be Brandon Thaw Harris. So please make time to be with us next Tuesday at 7 as well. And with that, I think, Bennie, we can just leap into your presentation. We'd love to take a look at the work.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to show an iMovie video, and I'm going to read something. I'm going to go into teacher mode for a second. Film sprockets are the overlooked part of the 35mm film roll. However, their importance to the mechanics of film make it all possible. I also view the glass slide mounts that come with institutional slides as an overlooked and invisible part of the film slide. Over the past 2 years, I've been working with the glass slide mounts to create collection boxes and objects that will occupy space in reference to the missing images and missing histories of people of color. These glass boxes and their heaviness carry the weight of a missing image. At the Asia Society, I have started gluing the glass together to make yardsticks. I have also been using mirrors and variable contrast filters from the darkroom to create light projections. The mirror and the VC filters are artifacts of photography, and in these pieces, I want to take them back to photography's definition and draw with light. People look for a projector, but it's very low tech. It's just a mirror projecting light on the wall. Black artist Adrienne Piper asked the question, why does her work have to be about identity? Why can't she make work just like Frank Stella? My response is this piece, Rothko Test Pattern. I initially wanted to replicate the Mark Rothko painting and bring it to light. However, I preferred the scraps of strips from the cut rectangles from theater gels and created a television test pattern instead. My love of the form of migration started as a child, watching murmurations of birds flying above and wondering what shape and form they would take next. For the past 20 years, the installations represent a fraction of a second of this movement in the sky. This piece is my first migration murmuration at Women in Their Work, composed of 2,000 transparent hand-cut images of high heel shoes called I2K for Imelda 2000. And it was a play on Y2K as the year was 2000. In recent years, the migrations have become about the transition of analog to digital and making 1 dot per inch in reference to DPI in digital printing. Here, the Western canon is on the wall, in flight, wanting to take a new shape. Also, what happens is a reverse pixelation. In pixelation, you have to back up to see what you're looking at. However, in my installations, you have to get close to see the images and the detail in the 1-inch dot and the shadows. Migration patterns have been an element of my work for over 20 years. I have always had dreams of flying. In my dreams, a running leap and a strong flap of my arms makes me airborne and no longer earthbound. My love for murmurations is no longer fulfilled in just watching them. I want to be in one. In order for me to fly, I would have to have a furcula or a wishbone like a bird. The analogous bone in our body to the furcula is our clavicles. I have taken a CT scan of my clavicles and with 3D software, fused them together to make my furcula, my wishbone. And next week at the Asia Society, they will fly as resin and ceramic pieces in a murmuration above the gallery space. Thank you.
Benny, thank you so much for that. It's such a perfect encapsulation of years of work and inquiry. And I think it's also a great lead-in to invite people to come and visit us at Asia Society and see in person some of this new development that you've been working on recently. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Lupe, can we jump to you now and have you share some images, please?
Absolutely. So for me, my most recent body of work has been inspired by my exploration of my cultural identity that I partook for my thesis exploration. It was inspired by this idea that I was born in Mexico and I moved to the United States at a very early age. And so my experience of Mexico was very different than that of my brothers, my father and mother, who spent more time there. And my experience came through the visitation of family whenever we would travel back. And like any other person that travels back to visit family, that is our primary focus, is to spend time with them because we're apart from them for so long. So what I experienced in Mexico is mostly market scenes and that of the street vendors that we would encounter as we would go into San Miguel to get food to take to our next visit. And so with this, I kind of wanted to portray these images of Mexico that have this personal connection to me. And I think a lot of people who have either traveled to Mexico or other countries can kind of form a connection because it's kind of the experience that the everyday person has, going to the market to get their everyday essentials, or just walking down the street, they encounter the individuals that work there. And so this one is called Mercado San Juan. It's inspired by my earliest memory of my mother taking us into the city to gather groceries. And as a reward, she would take us to this torta stand that was across the street from this butcher window where they would hang the turkeys and the chickens from there. And so here I kind of wanted the light, right, coming from the back to be drawing the focus to the chickens. This one's in my studio at Asia Society. This next scene is called Sabor De Mexico. I think whenever I think of Mexico, I think of the spices and the chilies, and it has its way into almost every cuisine that I remember fondly of. This one here is also available here, and it kind of shows a different side of my practice. I tend to enjoy working with pen, and I use these preliminary drawings to kind of flesh out these ideas for the paintings. And now they have also started to influence the cut paper works that I have been creating at the Asia Society. And so in these, I think of compositionally, how I'm going to organize the image, but also what I want the viewer to kind of pay attention to. By putting more detail in the figures, the viewers kind of are drawn to look at them, while the background is kind of abstracted in a way that you don't quite see the faces of the other individuals that are there. And so for Asia Society, I have started creating some of these cut paper pieces that I've been doing more or less for the past year. They were kind of as a result of the pandemic and not being able to work in oils in my studio. And so I had to think of a way that I can continue following this narrative of celebrating Mexican culture in a way that was not in oil paints. And so I thought of what better way than the symbol or the object that represents a celebration in Mexico, which is papel picado. And so for my installation my time at Asia Society as an artist on site, what I sought to do was to pay homage to the tradition of papel picado, which has a deep and rich history in Mexico, and is still practiced today by many artisans throughout Mexico. And it really started kind of as part of Dia de los Muertos, which is a holiday where the Mexican people honor their ancestors who have passed away. And eventually it moved on to other religious holidays. And then it became a part of every celebration, such as weddings, baptisms, quinceañeras, birthday parties, and so on and so forth. So with this, what I wanted to do was I wanted to create something that utilized the space, because the space that we were given to work in is absolutely beautiful. And I wanted to do something specifically for the space that we got. And so what I did is I worked on constructing these banners in the traditional form using hammer and chisel, and then attaching them to twine to create the banners that were later suspended. And so in this here, you can see them and how the light is projecting through the banners and onto the walls. And in this video, you can see me assembling the banners. And so each of these banners has 7 pieces. It has 3 with the moon design and 4 with the sun design. And what I'm doing is I am stretching the twine from end to end in the space, dipping them in a water and glue solution. Then I take the banners that are created with a tissue paper and adhere them to the twine. And as I do this, I kind of am creating each one. And this is definitely a very time-intensive practice, not only because of the time it takes to punch them out, but the actual time to build the banners themselves. And so what I did was actually thanks to the help of the Asia Society, I was able to get some volunteers. And so I had some volunteers from the university, as well as Jim Brown, who is a friend of the Asia Society, who on one Saturday afternoon helped me construct 40 banners in the span of 3 hours, which I was eternally grateful for, and made the project possible. But I also got assistance from some more of my friends. So Robert Riojas also helped me with the installation of the banners using the scaffold. And we did this the following Saturday, and it took us about 9 hours to suspend them throughout the space. And so now what is occurring is I'm also playing, continue that exploration with the light that is sometimes seen in my work. And I'm taking the cut paper designs that I've created and enlarging them using a laser cut machine. And so I'm enlarging the designs, and I'm creating them using BFK paper, which is much more heavyweight. And this ones don't have colors, so that what you pay attention to is going to be the shadows that are projected onto the walls themselves and occupying the space. Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much, Lupe. I think that that's such a great temptation to have people come and visit you during public hours. And just for everyone in the chat, we can include our website. The hours are from Thursday to Sunday, and please feel free to drop in often. It'll be on view until September 12th, so you can continue to see the projects unfold and the investigations deepen. Bennie and Lupe are very accomplished artists, and their bios are so long that it would probably take us a chunk of this program. So we'll include their details in the chat so you can connect with their websites and of course follow them on Instagram. And the same is true for Prince as well. His information and details will be in the chat so you can learn about his practice. For those of you who are lucky enough to visit us during the time of the Sightlines exhibition at Asia Society, Texas, you've seen our most recent collaboration with Prince, which was a delight to work on. So for me personally, what a treat to spend a portion of the evening with 3 of my favorite people. So I would love to pass the baton to Prince and ask him to kick off the conversation.
Thank you, Bridget, and thank you, Guadalupe and Bennie, for sharing your work. And first of all, let me encourage everyone in the audience please come to Asia Society and check out what they're doing. I had an opportunity to visit with them in their studios, and it was a wonderful experience seeing what these two artists are doing. And one more thing, because Guadalupe brought it up, you're absolutely right. Jim is an incredible person at Asia Society. I love him to death as well. 100% agree with you. With that said, for our discussion today, I'd like to start off talking to you about your process. Both of you work in very labor-intensive, deliberate processes where time, patience, and slowing down seems to be an integral part of the creation of your works. The installations feature multiples and emphasize the labor which is required to make these works. Is that labor critical for your works, and how do you want that labor to be interpreted with the content of the work for an audience?
Okay, so for me, I think the fact that I do work in multiple mediums, but each of those mediums is time intensive in itself, is a way in which they're connected. With the pen drawings, I have very intricate hatching and cross-hatching lines within them. The paintings have the intricate details in the background, which I view as important as the actual subject themselves. And then with the cut paper pieces, it's almost a form of meditation of cutting them out as I'm doing them. But what I'm really wanting to do is I'm really wanting to explore this imagery in multiple ways, because each time that I produce this image, whether it's in drawing, painting, or cut paper, I'm almost discovering things within the image that I had missed on the first go around. And then I also think in terms of the multitude, it creates a sense of emphasis and importance to what the viewer is looking at. By having multiples of that object, you're placing much more importance on it than if it were just of one.
Yeah, so that question made me think of when I first started doing the migrations, and I would cut images of the high heels by the thousands. And I think at that time, that was about sort of not losing the photographic object. I was really sort of like worried about sort of digital coming in and then the photographic object going away. And then that question also reminded me of when I showed Toby Camps my work when he was at the Menil. He said that the timelines that I'm making with the cut sprockets, he said it's kind of like sweaty conceptualism. And I just thought that was hilarious. I mean, I don't think he meant that necessarily in such a positive way, but I love what he said. It's true. That's what it is. It is sweat equity to make this piece. And I think that's what sort of makes it, and the number, you know, all the cuts that Lupe makes, all the cuts that I make, and the multitude of these pieces in one space, it just kind of overwhelms you. So, so definitely the labor is part of it and becomes part of the concept.
Yeah, could I go with a follow-up on that? Because through your Asia Society experience for both of you, your work has somewhat changed as well. Like Lupe, you switched from cut paper to now they're laser cut. So you kind of removed the hand from it, meaning that detailed, painstaking process. And a machine is doing that for you. And Benny, you switched to 3D printing things. So all of a sudden there's more automated actions within how your work is created. What do you think about these different other types of processes that you're engaging with now?
Lupe, do you want to go first? Go ahead.
Okay, yeah, so I think for me, the automated process has in a way freed me to think more conceptually about my work. And so with the smaller cut paper pieces that I'm doing by hand, I was always afraid in terms of how I was going to exhibit them, because the paper themselves are so fragile that in order to transport them, exhibit them, they needed to be framed. But from the beginning, I always knew that I wanted to showcase these with no frame necessary, because I love the projection of the shadows that occurs even within the frames. And so learning how to take the pieces that I've created by cutting by hand and then digitizing them and getting them reproduced at a much larger scale, like the ones that were hung. Now I'm able to really experiment not only with paper, but perhaps with other materials in the future as well. And I have no fear of them getting destroyed because I can always reproduce one, right? So it allows me to play with these ideas that before I was limited to the amount that I could produce.
Yeah, I mean, and as for me too, I mean, I think thinking about Lupe, it's sort of like, I think it helps us sort of create more. And I think it sort of pushes our ideas even further to ideas that our bodies can't make necessarily. I did do 3D printing. However, I think just for the material of the bones, I want to make them out of ceramic now because of trying out the resin. It didn't feel right. So I'm going to make them in resin and in ceramic with my hands and with a mold. So,
Yeah. If maybe I can take us in the direction of Chance a little bit. Both of your practices have, clear methodologies and a precision to them. But with this work and installation, each new space is bringing you a new set of considerations. And I just wonder if you can talk a little bit, share with all of us about the role that chance plays in your work and what your experience of being in the Asia Society space has brought to the work. And then, of course, also the wonderful camaraderie of the four artists working side by side in the space, all of these sort of chance variables. And Benny, maybe would you be willing to start?
sure. I always get asked when people come in and see the dot installations and the migrations, like, well, do you have an image that you start with, or what do you? So usually I just look at the wall and I start with one and I draw with my hand and just see where it would go. And if it were to fly, it would go like this, and maybe it would go this way. The space was a bit daunting to walk into day one with these tall walls all around you. But it's also encouraged me to create a very large light projection. So the space there calls for something bigger, and I've never made a light projection this big. The mirror was supposed to come today, but it'll come tomorrow, 130 inches by 60 inches. So it's going to be pretty beautiful going all the way up the wall. And I think as far as the camaraderie goes, I think we kind of cheer each other on. I think that's the wonderful thing. And, I haven't had this since graduate school. So it's been a while since I usually work in my studio by myself. So it's been really great to know the other artist and just to pop in or to say, hey, come look at this. What do you think of this? To have that is such a luxury.
And I could not agree more. I think the ability to actually be in the spaces with the other artists has really changed my ideas from what I thought I was going to be producing going in. And also just with the conversations, Benny, Stevie, Pritika, they helped me push the ideas even further. And so I think in terms of chance, being faced with the challenge of occupying a space that's bigger than my apartment, which is wonderful. I love it. I had to kind of like reevaluate what I had originally planned on doing, because given the space, no matter how big I made the cut papers, the space itself would just swallow it because of its magnitude. And so it was great because I think the best creativity occurs whenever you're faced with a problem that you need to solve. And so had I not participated in this space where I had this challenge, I think my cut paper work would have been the same for a year or two, because I saw no issues with it and the way that I was producing them. But because I had this space that I really wanted to do something to fill it, I had to view my practice re-examine it and find a way that I could still do what I wanted, but be able to do more creative things to fill the space.
And I think we both are using light in our work too, Lupe. I just loved when the lighting person came and helped us. We were both just like, oh my God, look at this. Come over here and see this. Look at this. He did such a great job. I didn't think it would look this great. I mean, it was really kind of a wonderful sort of eureka moment for us both.
Yeah,
I just want to
absolutely.
make a special shout to Harold Carrillo, who is our colleague who makes all the magic with the lighting happen. We are deeply grateful for everything that he makes possible for the artists that are on site.
Yes, absolutely. Like, I didn't know what it would look like, and then it just so happened everything was in the right place for it all to work out with any major changes, and he is incredible.
Well, and that's the great opportunity you guys have right now, because not many artists have the kind of space that you got, to just explore. And that in itself is such a treat to have. I want to talk a bit about the work that you have in there right now related to your backgrounds. And your path in the art world, including your training as it unfolded, in terms of each of us have very specific, unique stories of how we got to here. In other words, each of you has an experience of migration in your personal and familial history, which is a theme that appears in your installations there at the Asia Society. Can you talk about how this impacts and informs your work?
Benny, would you like to start off with this question?
Sure. So I think, I was born in the Philippines and I came to the US, to Connecticut, when I was 6 months old. And, I think growing up in the 70s and not seeing an image of myself and being asked where I was from, I think was sort of something that was sort of baked into me, that I wasn't from here. And I think I am an evidence of a migration to people, right? You come from somewhere else. So I think it's definitely that. And I think Lupe was talking about his experience, like how his experience with his siblings is very different. The older siblings who sort of knew the country longer, knew Mexico longer, and just like my brothers who were 9 years old and 8 years old and 7 years old when they came. Yeah, definitely. It's sort of wherever you are in the pecking order, it sort of changes your whole experience to being new to this country. So I came to art. So I heard on, what is it? How I built this the other day, there was a Black CEO and he said, in order to be, you have to see. So he said he didn't really see Black CEOs when he was growing up. So he didn't think he could do that. So when I went to college, I thought I was going to be the next Connie Chung, because that is who I saw in popular culture that looked like me. And I took like a media course, like a mass comm and media course, and I just realized this isn't for me. And that summer, I waited tables and I went to Europe and I started taking photographs. And I took this amazing photograph of my clothes drying. And when I printed it and I came back to the US, I thought, oh my God, this is amazing. So I switched my major that fall to art and just never looked back. And, I am a professor as well. And I love that. I love that I get to sort of instill that. I get to think about my photo one experiences and just make them excited about work. It's sort of the best thing. I mean, I've just being there for this past 4 weeks and 2 weeks are only left. I don't want to leave. I've been flying, really, literally flying. It feels like it. It's just so great to be in that space. And just the second you walk into that building, just the Asia Society, just the calm. It's just such a beautiful place. And it's just so peaceful that I feel like it's a place where I can really make and just be very deliberate and think and make my work.
Okay. And as for me, kind of like the way that my path has kind of progressed, I really have to thank my brothers for me becoming an artist. My parents didn't go to school. Majority of my brothers came at an older age, so they started working as soon as we got here. But I remember Cruz and Pedro, which are the ones that are closest to age to me. I remember I was like in fourth grade whenever Cruz came over, and he did a drawing of like the first truck that we ever owned. And I remember I was just so like excited that somebody in our family was making art. And from fourth grade on, me and my brothers would draw on the kitchen table, and it kind of just progressed and progressed. And I continued kind of like pursuing art. And, you know, growing up, the only exposure that I think I ever had to Chicano art or Mexican art representation was in the magazines of lowrider art. Me and my brothers would always buy those magazines because we would see our culture represented in them. And then the other place was Blood In, Blood Out with Adan Hernandez, who created all these paintings and works for the movie. That was kind of like my inspiration. Like I saw myself in it. And then I went to school at Houston Baptist University, but I didn't actually go there to study art. I was actually a Christianity and business major going in. And then after the first semester, it just so happened all of my classes were in the fine arts building. And I would go in and I would see this art on the wall, and it just like reminded me like how much I truly missed it. And it was like by October of that first semester, I went into my counselor's office and I was like, hey, I'm gonna switch my major. I'm gonna study art. And then, you know, I kind of never looked back. But in terms of like the changes that's happening is I was very much taught traditionally. I was more classical painter, drawer. But now, right, I'm exploring more like craft-based works with the cut paper. And you know, at first it was kind of like this inner struggle of like knowing which direction that I should continue. And in all honestly, you know, I think I'm going to continue moving both with my paintings and the cut paper because, you know, as an artist, you create what excites you. And I love painting, it's a passion of mine, but also the cut paper excite me. And even though they're two different worlds, you know, it's what I love. So yeah.
I think we talked about this a little bit before, but maybe we can go into it in greater detail. This idea that what you're working on at Asia Society is really emphasizing the role of light, either transmitted through the cut paper or reflected off of the mirror and the filters, Benny. But can you both discuss that and talk a little bit about, you know, light is so intangible in some ways. How do you plan for that as you're envisioning an installation? How do you incorporate light as a major component of the installation?
So I'll go ahead and go. So for the film pieces, and in my migration installations, light has always been very important because I would print on transparency film and hand cut it. So the slide film is just like that. And it's really important for the pieces to be lit well so that one light doesn't erase the other light. So then you don't see the actual shape and the actual shadow of the image. What Harold did was he made it so crisp and clear, you can see it in just perfect detail on the wall. So it's really, really quite critical. And for the projection pieces, sometimes things happen. It just depends on the angle of the light. And at one point, just when we were sort of playing around, there were sort of two different shapes happening too, because of the two different lights that were on it. So it's, you know, that's kind of like Lupe was saying, he gets excited. I mean, I think that's the kind of magical thing of working with light, like you just never know. And some friends were in the studio on Sunday, and then they were talking about the shadows themselves just double the number of dots on the wall. So, and I think Lupe found that too when he did his and the lights came on, it was huge on the wall and crisp and clear and beautiful. And you can almost see more details in the shadow than on the paper when you're looking at it.
Yeah, I agree. I think I knew that I wanted to work with light um, for the space, just because I had noticed in the cut paper pieces when I framed them, they lifted off of the backing, and there was this sense of like cast shadow that was created within the frame itself. And so, kind of just seeing that little bit of hint of what light can do to the work, I knew that I wanted to magnify that for this space. And so in terms of the planning, I really was just going around with the light that I actually use to paint and have consistent light whenever I'm painting. And I kind of suspended them first, and I kind of just played with the direction and the distance that the light needed to be in order for the projection to work on the wall. And so and then like you said, once Harold, right?
Harold.
Yeah, Harold came in, and he saw kind of the idea that we had both with the works that are suspended in the back, and then the papel picados throughout the space. He saw the idea that we had. He went in and he just started manipulating the light so that there was almost like an interweaving of the banners within the walls, where some of them were much more crisp, some of them were larger and much more subtle. And it's just like absolutely beautiful.
Well, and also what I find interesting with both your spaces and dealing with light is it acts like a theatrical set as well. You know, you create a definite mood and tone in a space with the way you're lighting your objects, which also as a viewer, when you enter, it takes us into a different headspace as well, which I think, you know, it makes a really nice dialogue with the work. So, you know, what y'all are doing with light is just wonderful.
Thank you.
I'd like to switch gears for a moment
Okay.
and talk about where we are in terms of our moment in history, where some arts institutions are addressing their histories of not featuring the work of artists of color, and some now are intentionally working to change their exhibitions and their permanent collections. And I'd like for you to share with us what is your perspective on our current moment.
I think we're in an exciting moment that there is a lot more representation happening with artists of color. I know that this Smithsonian is opening their first Chicano art section, as well as the Chicano Museum that's going to open up in Los Angeles, right? But I think this has kind of come about by all of the attention that has come about with the injustice and the civil active movements that have been occurring over the past 2 years, really, and drawing attention to the importance that artists of color kind of play within the culture and kind of society as a whole. And so it's an exciting time that after many years that artists of color have been neglected, that we're finally having a platform to talk about our experiences and about our cultures.
So, I think, yes, we're at a very sort of important time right now. I think a lot of people are realizing that there are a lot of missed histories or histories that haven't been told, or people that we should know about from our culture that we never learned about before. There's one in particular that I made a piece for. His name is Larry Itliong. He was a labor organizer, and he was very instrumental in the uprising of the grape pickers in Northern California in the 60s. And I only learned about him a couple years ago. I didn't know about the Tulsa riots until I saw Watchmen. And I just was aghast that why wasn't that part of my history? And I was mad. Why don't we know these things? And, my pieces now, the installations of the Western canon on the wall, they always start with a woman of color. The one at the Asia Society starts with Edmonia Lewis, the Black sculptor, and ends with a female artist, and it ends with The Dinner Party by Judy Chicago. I think women, people of color are left out of the histories, and you just it's sort of like not a fear, but it's sort of like you wonder how many more histories do we not know that are just as incredible as the ones we're finding out about right now.
Yeah.
And as far as institutions sort of doing more, the Asia Society definitely is doing that. The Asia Society hosts My Philippine X group of artists in Houston. I mean, it's pretty incredible that Bridget gives us the space to do that so we can meet. It's a pretty empowering thing for everybody in the room too, just to see other artists that are Filipino, performers, musicians, visual artists, sort of, and seeing what they're doing. I think it's very empowering. So I think, we need to be more visible. I think we need to talk more. And I think museums need to collect more artists of color, period. I think that's the bottom line. And women artists.
Yeah.
I think there's just not enough in collections, period.
I gotta say, I think I'm a little bit more jaded than the both of you. And by that, I mean, I've seen this sort of sine wave pattern in the art marketplace where the art world, gets in tune to a specific cause or issue, and then it reverts always back to the mean. And in my professional career of 25 years now, I've seen it always dip back to just the way it's always been. So I'm optimistic, but I'm also cautious of where we are. I'm hoping that with social media and things like that, the conversation is always extended further. But then, there's other layered things to this that, I just play in my head all the time, which is, things like when I was starting out, I made an intentional decision of I didn't want to be the Indian artist, because at that time, curators were saying, you should make more work that looks like this. And I was in the process in my head of going, wait a minute, my background, my cultural background mediates through everything I see, right? Kind of like the Adrian Piper, statement that she's saying,
Right.
that is my experience, but I am able to do other things as well. And so for myself, which was probably an art marketing horrible decision, but I chose to work on the projects that I'm interested in, knowing that my cultural background is always feeding it in some way. And when we talk about, exhibitions that we see out there now, everyone, and I'm overgeneralizing, obviously, everyone is at a moment of wanting to say, hey, I'm paying attention, right?
Yeah.
But when they do that, sometimes it's the most easiest way to show I'm paying attention versus what you were saying of Mark Rothko, right? Hey, where are the people, the abstract expressionist artists of color? Where are, all these other options, right? Which is an important thing that, institutions should also, I think, be reflecting and considering.
Right.
Yeah.
And Prince, do you think also that some of this is from the construct of the museum and museum boards and how they're funded, because in Europe, how the collections are made there, it's sort of a different thing when it's the government also paying for it. And, I kind of wonder how that plays into this too. And sort of you being sort of pigeonholed into being that Indian artist or that Filipino artist or that Mexican artist. Like it sort of like makes it, sort of a package that's acceptable that they get or something.
Well, and that's where I said it's a layered sort of thing, because you're right, how institutions frame their collections is part of it. It's also curatorial decisions and the curator's background. And even, I met the most open-minded curators, in my lifetime, but at the same time, their experience is limited by their own history, so they can only attach what they think it should be.
Yeah.
Right? So it's so layered in terms of the complexity. And the one last thing on this is, the young artists, and this is what I always think about, young artists that go to places, right? And they see artists of color shows. if they're only seeing one type of work from color, artists of color, they go, oh, that's what I need to be making to be seen, versus, finding their own authentic voice, whatever that may be. It could be painting beautiful landscapes. There's so much more to art making than just, the channel, the pigeonholing sort of narrow views that sometimes creep up in the art market.
Yeah, can I just add something? I think also one of the things that has really changed as well is just the platform that artists have because of social media. They can share their work on social media and build a platform where they can express who they are, right? They can talk about issues that they care about and even form communities with other artists of color. So for me, I think one of my actual favorite things is just I've had conversations with artists that live in different parts of Texas that I have never met. Other artists of colors that are in California and New York, and we're constantly in conversation about the work and our role as artists of color in providing representation to those people that perhaps don't encounter it as much, right? I kind of mentioned like my only exposure was Lowrider magazine and a movie, right? And so nowadays it's like we are given a platform to speak freely, and then hopefully as we can be recognized for who we are as artists, whether it's landscape or more installation based or performance based.
But we're all educators too,
Yes.
which is wonderful.
Yes.
And I had this thought the other day that in my undergraduate and in my graduate school, I didn't have one professor of color. So I think that landscape prints is changing and may sort of, for young artists, sort of provide a different path, perhaps, as well.
True. I can't, in my jaded world, I can't see the improvements that have happened in 25 years. They have, definitely. I guess I just want to see them faster.
Right.
Lupe, I also appreciate this idea of social media being an unmediated space for artists. There's no institution sort of telling the narrative or a curator sort of intervening and interpreting. I love the directness that social media provides, where artists can be in immediate contact with their viewers and their audiences and build conversations and lines of inquiry based on that, rather than part of an institutional space. Because I think that, all of them are part of the ecosystem that artists need for their work to be seen.
Yeah.
But for myself personally, from a curatorial perspective, I've really appreciated that, especially in the last 3 to 5 years. And I joke sometimes like, no, we're not sponsored by Instagram, but I feel like I see the difference that makes, and also the way that everyone can connect. And I think that has a power, obviously for bad, but mostly we focus on the power for good when it comes into this domain for artists. So I realize where we are in the clock, which I find totally stunning. How did all of that time disappear? So if you are in the audience and you have a question that you want these esteemed guests to answer, please roll it up into the chat so we can make sure to get to it before our time ends together. But maybe if I can pivot a little bit to a question about medium for Bennie and Lupe, and talk a little bit about the role that photography plays for both of you. And I think, for Lupe, the role photography plays is a little more nested. We may need to unpack it somewhat for viewers who are not as familiar with your practice. For people who are following you, they already understand that important source material that photography is. But Bennie, the idea of darkroom training, repurposing slides, can you both talk about how photography fits into the practices that you've developed, and both the very kind of clear cut, but also more subtle ways?
Yeah, I think for me, because I want to depict specific individuals or a specific location. all of my drawings, all of my paintings are rooted in reference photos that I have taken throughout my travels in Mexico. And so as I went to Mexico, I always kind of photographed these places that I deemed important to me. And I did it even before I knew I was going to be developing a series of works from them. And so whenever it comes to transitioning them into paintings and drawings, because they had significant value to me whenever I encountered these scenes, it's easy to kind of portray that in my works where there's an importance to me and there's a connection that people can form there. And people who've been to Mexico City or been to San Miguel, they have like an idea. It's like, oh my goodness, I know where this is. I remember being there. I can hear the music coming from there, or I can smell the smells of the market, right? And so photography really plays an important role because it provides me the source imagery that I need to kind of create my works.
So there's an old adage that students take a photography class because they want to see themselves. And I think that was pretty true for me. And
I'm sorry. Keep going, Benny. I'm sorry. That made me laugh.
So, I remembered as a Photo 1 student, learning about the mirror in the SLR. And thinking, oh, that's pretty cool, so I get to really show people who I am and show them what I think. And then it reminded me of this Miley Cyrus video that my daughters were watching, where she had a camera and she's swinging and dancing around. And I thought, oh, cool, she's going to take pictures. No, she didn't take a picture. She went like this. And I was like, oh my God, it could have been like this powerful thing about sort of showing the world what you think and what you feel, but instead it was sort of about objectifying herself, So where am I going with that? But so the mirror has been, from the camera and thinking about Photo 1 and photography, it's become sort of obsolete as well as the sprockets are in the mirrorless cameras that are coming in now. I think that quote is sort of about seeing myself, wanting to see myself, I think was very true growing up in the 70s and not seeing an image of myself. I do love the fact, though, in the installations, and this particular slide installation, dot installation, is the slide collection of HSPVA. So these are the slides that HSPVA students learned art history from. They learned the Western canon on these. And at first, people don't know what they are. And I just love them walking up and then oh my God, there are photographs on each one of these things. Look, come over here, look. And they just stand there for the longest time, really recognizing. So I like that sort of recognition of things. And then they try to point things out to each other. So I think subtly the photos are there. But I don't sort of let them know at first. So I sort of like that sense of discovery that happens with photography in the slide installations. Why was that funny? Why was that funny, Prince? About
well, just that people take photo just to take pictures of themselves, and it was just how much more narcissistic can we get as a culture, right?
Well, I don't think it was taking necessarily pictures of themselves, but I think sort of seeing who they are. I think that's I look at it that way. Not
Okay,
Miley
gotcha.
Cyrus. Don't look at it the Miley Cyrus way.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, I'm with you. Yeah. And that's, but that raises an interesting question of how we see and look now, right? Yeah. Versus before with the social media age, how we view ourselves, how we present ourselves to the world in a totally different way of thinking than we did, 20 years ago before all this existed, right?
Right. Absolutely. And I mean, and what is that doing to the psyche, of self? And sort of this projected image that you're showing everybody, but really, is that who you are?
I think because of where we are in time, one of the things that I'd like to talk about with artists on site and how it came to be at Asia Society is a particular focus for me is looking at the incredible work that's being done in Houston and in Texas, a little more broadly based. And if I can sort of touch back on something that you mentioned, Benny, the wonderful organization that's come to fruition under the leadership of Matt Manalo, the Filipinx Artists of Houston, and what a dynamic group of artists that is, all of whom are based in Houston. And I hope that people in the audience will take an opportunity to celebrate the opening in so many places of the Texas Biennial. And to maybe get in your cars and let's commence road tripping, especially to San Antonio, so that the installation of the Filipinx Artists of Houston at the McNay, which Benny, I think opens tomorrow.
Yes, September
Yes.
1st.
So hopefully people will get circulating around and see the wonderful work of the Texas Biennial team. And I think closer to home on Thursday evening, the opening reception for the component of it at Photo Fest opens, so people can find the details for that, because really all curators in Texas should be celebrating the work that's being done by each one of you as artists based in Houston, luckily for us. But with the biennial, we have an excuse to look across the state for artists who were based here, but also who have come here and established their studio practices. And so I'd like to just sort of throw some attention to that. And I wonder, in closing, Benny and Lupe, if you don't mind to just say a little bit about, you've had this experience at Asia Society. What's next? What does this lead you to? Do you have some threads that are coming out of this experience that you are getting excited about next projects? For the people, all of us in the audience tonight that are so passionate about the work you're already doing, what can we look forward to?
Go ahead, Benny.
No, I think definitely this larger light projection, I'm really excited about. And I think they will just maybe keep getting bigger and bigger, as well as the wishbones. I mean, it's quite a leap to go from slide film to ceramics. But I think the Asia Society kind of gave me the confidence and sort of, the laboratory in which I could make that move. So I'm pretty excited about what those murmurations become that will occupy space.
We're excited about it also. Lupe, what about you?
Yeah, I think it's as well, especially after this experience, I definitely want to continue exploring this idea of continuing to work with light and filling spaces. I also want to start exploring and taking these designs that I've created with paper, and it's something that I've kind of started experimenting with, but cutting them out of metal and placing them in public spaces. Because for me, I think, like I said, having that visibility of artists, especially for me, it was important having visibility of like Hispanic artists and having that type of work exhibited where people can see and access it. Because I think there's also that barrier of accessibility for some people. That's what I want to do in terms of like moving forward. I am going to be working on a body of work, hopefully. Now have an exhibition in San Antonio, kind of coming back home. I've kind of been making all this work, and I've been in Houston for so many years, but going back and having my first exhibition at Presa House, which does promote a lot of artists of color from across the state. It's really exciting. And so that's kind of like what's next for me is doing that.
Well, I think, in the chat, we have listed the websites and Instagram connectivity so that people can follow on and keep up with what's coming next. But really don't miss the opportunity to come and see the wonderful work that they're doing in person between now and September 12th. As I mentioned before, we have another webcast on next Tuesday at 7 p.m. with Pritika Roshgaria and Stevie Spurgeon. I hope you'll join us for. Benny and Lupe will be in the audience probably asking questions also. And then on the 9th, which is Thursday, we're having a closing reception where everyone can come together and celebrate the wonderful efforts of each of these four so talented artists. So that's kind of what's coming up for us. We hope to see you at both. And I just really can't say thank you enough to all three of you. It's just the best part of our work to be able to spend time with such big brains and such creative individuals. I love talking to all of you. And so that you spent time with us together and shared your insights with the audience is a great gift for all of us. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And of course, it goes without saying, but I'd like to just give a special nod of gratitude. Our funders who are making all of this possible for our audiences. And we're deeply grateful to each of them as well. This project at Asia Society and all of the related programs with it are presented by Nancy C. Allen, Chin Hee-jun and Eddie Allen, and Leslie and Brad Bucher. Major support comes from the Brown Foundation, the Houston Endowment, and the City of Houston through the Houston Arts Alliance. Generous funding is also provided by the Anchorage Foundation of Texas, the Clayton Fund, Texas Commission on the Arts, National Endowment for the Arts, Wortham Foundation, and Agnes Sue Tong, PhD, and Oscar L. Tong. United Airlines is our official airline partner, and funding is also provided through contributions from the exhibition's patron circle, a dedicated group of individuals and organizations committed to bringing exceptional visual art to Asia Society, Texas. Thank you all again for joining us. I wish you a very good night and looking forward to seeing you again next Tuesday. Thanks again.